for us that we had board overview memos, but the overview memos weren't actually posted with the rest of the meeting materials. So a transparency issue of if we're going to have a consent agenda, we should have all the materials just posted. Unless they're obviously confidential board overview memos. And then there are several items on this contracts on this agenda that we didn't get the quarterly reports or the year-end reports. So I'd like to have those. Also, the board cover memos didn't actually list the performance goals, rather they referenced the contract, and just from in terms of transparency and again to move things through a consent agenda, to have actually that dropped into the board cover memo versus having board members having to go to the contracts, because often they're hundreds of pages long to try and find what they are. And then the last piece is when you do go there, it actually says on some of them that they're not going to be finalized. The performance goals aren't going to be finalized till the end of September. And since we are going to be voting on some of these contracts, which could be a 4-year approval because they've got 1-year automatic renewals that don't come back to the board, that when those performance goals are finalized, that in September, that they be reported to the board.
Thank you, Director Brim-Edwards. Is there any further discussion? I would like to say that we are having ongoing conversations about our materials and how we are communicating with one another. And I know that the folks creating those contracts and leading them are continuing to work for increasing transparency to make that easier for both board members and members of the public to access. So thank you for those comments, Director Brim-Edwards. I know it's a work in process. All right, are we ready to vote? The board will now vote on resolution 6167 through 6172. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
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 All opposed,
Yes.
please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? The consent agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shue voting
yes.
All right, thank you. We turn now to student and public comment. Before we begin, I would like to review our guidelines for comments. The board thanks the community for taking the time to attend this meeting and provide your comments. Public input informs our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen. Board members and the superintendent will not respond to comments or questions during public comment, but our board office will follow up on board-related issues raised during public testimony. We request that complaints about individual employees be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. If you have additional materials or items you would like to provide to the board or superintendent, we ask that you email them to publiccomment@pps.net. Please make sure when you begin your comment that you clearly state your name and spell your last name. You will have 3 minutes to speak. You will hear a sound after 3 minutes, which means it is time to conclude your comments. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have anyone signed up for student or public comment?
We do not.
Okay. I'll move on then. I think that's the first time that that's happened since I've been on the board. Nathaniel, Student Representative Shue, would you like to provide us with your report this evening?
Yes. Yeah. So, let's see. I was hoping that this would be my first normal report where I'd get input from and update you on the DSC as well as students more generally. However, this hasn't been the case largely because of the chaos of the last few days, with many dealing with issues such as the extreme winds and the ensuing power outages. In fact, my power went out early this morning and has yet to return, and I'm currently speaking to you from an alternative location which does have power for the time being. Nevertheless, there is one thing that I'd like to say. Soft Start has been incredibly helpful. Besides giving everyone a chance to get acquainted with our new virtual environments, which would be critical in its own right, we have been able to adapt to the widespread power outages with relative ease. In any case, I'm hopeful that I should be able to begin my regular reports at our next meeting, which should be more substantive and insightful. Thank you.
All right, I just got a text message from Director Constam that she is in the waiting room, I believe, Kara.
I just admitted her.
Oh, great. Okay. It's just, I really want to appreciate Kara, who was not expecting to be hosting alone this meeting tonight. And we are on a brand new platform. So thank you, Ms. Bradshaw, for your adaptability. And I know that as Nathaniel said, the soft start has been helpful. Unfortunately, you don't get a soft start, Kara. You get to use this technology and play videos and everything live on PPS TV. So know that we extend you lots of patience and grace as we all figure this out. And I know that you had to take on this role rather unexpectedly over the weekend. So thank you for doing that and for helping us function today with Zoom. All right, Superintendent Guerrero, are you ready to share your report with us tonight?
Thank you, Chair Lowry, and good evening, directors, staff colleagues, and to everyone who's tuned in this evening and watching our live stream. Well, the new school year is finally here. We're a few days into our soft start before we launch into our comprehensive distance learning model. I think you all can recognize that this has been atypical, a rather unusual school year, as if the pandemic weren't enough. To Nathaniel's point, now we have winds, we have power outages. Thank you everyone for your patience today. That was rather unexpected for many of our student, staff, and school campuses, where that made a day already just another obstacle to overcome. But as you know, these first 2 weeks are considered our soft start. The focus is really on re-engaging our students and reconnecting with families, providing an introduction to new teachers and classmates, and really assessing which support students may still need to successfully participate as we launch into courses and distance learning. So this includes investing time, getting familiar with identified technology platforms and resources that will be used for teaching and learning. So my hat's off to our school leaders, our educators, and support staff who have really just dove in and started making those connections with our students. Now, while our grade 1 through 12th graders started last week, it was our kindergarten students' first day today. One of my favorite occasions is meeting our new kindergartners for the first time. And well, that didn't happen in person today, but I do want to recognize it was their first day of their PPS career. And I know their teachers were also excited to start making connections with our younger students. In the spirit of connecting with students and families and with our colleagues, as district leaders, we also want to maintain some consistency. So this past weekend, we prepared and recorded a back to school message, which will be shared with all of our families and staff tomorrow. So in lieu of a usual superintendent's report, I thought I would provide directors with an advance preview tonight. So with your indulgence, we'd like to play a video clip for you here. And so here's the world premiere of a back to school message.
And just a second while I figure out how to switch from one thing to another.
Staff and families of the Portland Public Schools. This message tries to healthy and provide
Is this sound garbled for other people?
Yes. Yes.
Our superintendent and to oversee our school system's efforts and work to support every grade level. Sounds like there's not enough horsepower in the broadband connection here.
Yeah. Let me see. I'm not sure what to do about it, but just give me a sec.
It looks like you're still buffering. Maybe if you rewind, we can make sense of the beginning.
And you might want to turn on original sound, Kara, if you either under more or on the top left. If you turn on original sound, then your computer won't try to suppress it as background noise.
Arrived once again at the beginning of a new school year. No matter how unusual this fall might be, some things remain the same. From welcoming our youngest students to their first learning experiences, to supporting our high school students as they prepare and think about their post-secondary lives. It is my privilege to commence my 4th year serving as your superintendent and to oversee our school system's efforts and work to support every PPS student in every grade level at every school. It's important to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional land of Indigenous people who once made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We must continue to acknowledge, celebrate, and honor Native American history and heritage. Native people continue to make our city and our region a more dynamic and thriving place for all. Those traditional lands include where I stand here, outside of Harriet Tubman Middle School. Like so many other schools, classrooms, gyms, hallways, and playgrounds in Portland right now, Tubman remains quiet. We miss our students dearly, but we will always act first in the interest of their health and wellness and that of our staff and educators. I know we all look forward to that wonderful day when we can all open our classrooms again. While our school campuses are unusually still, the homes of our students and educators are now buzzing with activity as they are re-engaging and reconnecting for the first time in months. These daily changes are not the only differences as we begin this school year. Not only are we teaching and learning from our kitchen tables and living rooms, we are doing so amid a global pandemic, an economic crisis, and a racial uprising. Portland families have suffered the loss of loved ones, parents are struggling to find work, and those who have jobs are balancing work-life demands they could not have imagined just several months ago. And a reckoning of racial injustices that have plagued this country and our community for far too long is taking place across America and on the streets of Portland. Our young people are among those leading the fight for change and how Black citizens are treated and valued. They move us. They demonstrate their power and moral authority and cause us to think about the immense role and responsibility we have as the adults, whether that be as a parent, grandparent, aunt, or uncle, to love, encourage, and support our youth, or as educators and staff, recognizing the privilege we have in standing with our broader community, including our culturally specific partners and social services organizations. In these challenging times, I am grateful for how our young people are carrying on the work of so many before them. They are remarkable, fighting for justice while navigating the unprecedented circumstances that surround us all. Of course, we have a role to play here too, but our young people are already making our community a better one. The many new realities we are now facing call upon us to come together, to rely on each other. When we recognize our interdependence, our school community grows stronger, and we are able to rise to the challenges in front of us. This summer, educators from across PPS, along with central office leaders, public health professionals, and community leaders, came together to build a comprehensive plan that strived to ensure that at this time of distance learning, every one of our PPS students has the resources and support they need to learn. As we have since we closed campuses last March, we will continue to make sure every student has access to the digital tools they need to experience success in our comprehensive distance learning model. During the last 6 months, our outstanding nutrition services team has distributed well over 1 million meals to students and will continue to make meals available to any child ages 1 to 18, expanding our distribution sites to over 40 schools this fall. Our bus drivers are also delivering meals to the homes of 700 students and counting. Like the best school systems always do, we are meeting our students where they are. We know that our students and families need us now more than ever. And in coordination with culturally specific partners, community-based organizations, Multnomah County, and so many others, we are making available an expanding array of services and supports. I want to invite everyone to visit our district website to learn more about our comprehensive set of student and family supports listed school by school. These programs are intended to be responsive to student and family needs across the district and are particularly weighted towards supporting our students and families of color, especially our Black and Native American families, who have been disproportionately impacted by the fallout of the pandemic and ensuing economic crisis. In fact, this school year, we are deepening our partnerships and investments with culturally specific organizations. While we are redoubling our efforts to provide support and access to basic services during these unusually challenging times, we are also continuing to follow Harriet Tubman's directive. You have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars. This pandemic is not going to stop us from being ambitious, from doing what we know is best for students, or from ultimately realizing our district's vision. For example, despite a statewide budget deficit, PPS is one of the few districts who will begin this school year with an increased number of school counselors and social workers across our schools. That is due in large part because so many of you, especially our labor partners, fought so hard for a historic increase in public education funding by the state of Oregon with the Student Success Act. And as a result of the innovative and transformative leadership of our teaching and learning teams, we will be piloting a very unique elective class I am particularly proud of. This summer, dozens of high school teachers, students, and community partners gathered to develop the first of its kind Climate Change and Climate Justice high school elective course. PPS is becoming recognized for being a national leader on climate justice, and we are just getting started. Construction continues on safe, state-of-the-art learning environments as we modernize campuses at Madison and Lincoln High Schools and finish construction at a brand new Kellogg Middle School, which will open in the fall of 2021. And just as we are constructing new campuses, we are also building on the talented workforce here at Portland Public Schools. I want to wish a warm welcome to our new staff, educators, and leaders. For the last few years, school principals and central office leaders have gathered at our annual Summer Leadership Institute to prepare to launch into the new school year. And every year we have a theme. This year's theme is Together We Will. As I've made my way through a number of video calls over the summer with students, staff, and community members, one of the things that has made me the proudest to be superintendent has been the Together We Will attitude. That even in the midst of a pandemic, we remain committed to our students and our families and determined to make the learning experience both transformative and joyful. I know this fall is not like any we've experienced before. It is not going to be without its challenges. But after meeting and working and being inspired by so many of you, I also know this. We might be challenged, but we will not be defeated. Together, we will make this year a memorable one, filled with engagement and inspiration as we continue to keep the love of learning alive for the nearly 50,000 students of the Portland Public Schools. Thank you.
Directors, I hope the audio was clear enough to get that back to school message. Looking forward to our families and our employees having a chance to view that tomorrow morning. But wanted to give you a little bit of a preview. Apologies about the choppiness of the video and the lip syncing on my part. But I do want to welcome everybody back. It's working as well as it's working because of the commitment of all of our folks. So a big kudos and applause to everybody doing their best to make it work. So welcome back to our upper grade students, and welcome to your school career kindergartners today. That concludes my report, Chair.
Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero. It was lovely to get to see some of those images, and I know that I'm missing the opportunity to be in our buildings, to be in our schools, and so it was great to be able to see you in those spaces, and then to see some of our students as well. I took a back to school picture of my daughter sitting at her desk, ignoring me while she, whispered under her breath, "Mom, my camera's on." It was not quite the same as the back to school photo in front of one of our beautiful school buildings. So I think we're all adjusting to the strangeness of this season. Speaking of that, we are adjusting to the strangeness of this school year and still doing our business as a board. And so it is that time of year when we discuss the superintendent's evaluation so that we can communicate clearly with Superintendent Guerrero our expectations as a board. As the board members know, but I'm not sure everyone does, the board's role is really to be the governance body and to set the vision for the district, to approve the budget, to communicate with the community, and to employ the superintendent. That's one of our really important functions. And so as that relationship, we want to make sure we're clearly communicating. And so we begin a conversation about how we are going to evaluate Superintendent Guerrero tonight. And so I've asked Director Scott, not Director Bailey, but Director Scott, the other Scott, to lead us in that process. And hopefully his phone connection will last for him to be able to get through that. But actually, as I'm introing this, I'm realizing that I've been sitting in this chair for an hour and a half. And I know that many of our board members all were in a meeting, and some of our staff before we hopped in here. So I'm going to have us all stand up and do a 2-minute break. And then we'll turn it over to Director Scott to lead us into a discussion of Superintendent Guerrero's evaluation. So take a 2-minute break. We'll be back at 6:34. break because I could feel myself hunching over the computer screen. So I hope you all took a chance to stand up, and if you didn't stand up, Superintendent Guerrero, that you at least stretched a little bit. We have an ongoing discussion about needing to stand up. So Director Scott, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I invite you to go ahead and begin our conversation about the evaluation.
Great, and you might hear the rest of the family as well, but I have told them that this is the moment they need to mute themselves, so we'll see how it goes. No, I appreciated your setup, actually, Chair Lowry, about the superintendent evaluation template. I mean, I think as something we know, the role of the superintendent is really critical to ensuring the success of our students, and the annual evaluation of the superintendent's performance is one of the responsibilities we have as board members. So each fall, the board, in collaboration with the superintendent, adopts an evaluation template for the upcoming year. Last year, as you may recall, we met over several different retreats and meetings. We identified 4 board goals and the metrics by which we would monitor the progress of those goals. And the intention of that process was really to anchor part of the superintendent's evaluation to those goals. However, as with a lot of things with COVID-19, it's sort of a new world. And as a result, this year, even though we still have our 4 board goals, we don't have the metrics required to measure the progress against the academic milestones we identified in those goals. So, in other words, we set these board goals and we had all of these metrics, but what we don't have now as a result of distance learning is a sense of where the baseline should be. And so, given the pandemic and the unprecedented changes in education, we're figuring out what a new proposal should be for the 2021 school year. And in talking to staff, the idea is that could we use this current academic year, to gather baseline data on those student performance goals, which we could then use to set targets for the upcoming academic year in 2021-2022, and come back to those board goals. I think one of the things that at least is important to me as a board member, we spent a lot of time on that last year, and those were 3-year goals. We don't want to lose sight of that. And I think one of the important things of this process right now is making sure it's really clear to board members and also the public that those board goals are still very much in action. They're very much something that we're going to be focusing on, and we're going to be reporting the data this year. Even with distance learning, we're going to be showing where our students are. And the key question is not, we're not moving away from those goals. The key question is can we set sort of targets around those? And I think essentially we can. And what we can do this year is reset the baseline. And hopefully with COVID and with distance learning, we won't see a dramatic decline in terms of student performance, but we also know in terms of talking to education experts nationwide that there is somewhat of an expectation that this moment and distance learning may have an impact on our students and their overall performance. So we really need to take a look at that. So as a result, we're still going to receive all the data from those board goals in the 2020-2021 school year. But because we can't set baseline data, we're coming up with a new proposal. And so the proposal that we're talking about is, instead of using those board goals for the superintendent's evaluation, focusing on the 8 leadership standards identified by the Oregon School Board Association and the Coalition of Oregon School Administrators. These leadership standards were recently updated to reflect a strong focus on racial equity and social justice, which is something that we as a board talked about wanting to see more of last year. We did use 5 of these standards in the superintendent's evaluation over this last year. So the proposal is to use all 8 of the standards in this upcoming year to evaluate superintendent's performance, reset the baseline, come back next year with a focus on those student outcomes, student achievement goals. So with that, Chair Lowry, I'll turn it back over to you for discussion.
Great. Sorry that my video was off earlier. I forgot to push all the buttons when we came back from break.
Wow. That was just a long enough pause that I assumed I had been cut off about 30 seconds in.
Sorry, no, we actually miraculously heard all of that, Andrew. So I will share that Director Scott is in a place where he has lost power and Wi-Fi. So he is making do, as are many of us today in this kind of chaotic day.
Yes, by
Great.
phone only.
By phone only, so we don't get to see you as we converse. So I'm going to go ahead and so the proposal before the board is to focus the superintendent's evaluation on the 8 OSBEA standards. We're going to have a discussion tonight about that and share our initial thoughts, questions, responses. We are not voting on the evaluation tonight, but Andrew is going to listen intently. Hopefully, if the phone doesn't give out, to our conversation here. We'll also have our meeting minutes, and I will also be taking notes. And then he will bring back before us on September 22nd for a vote the proposed evaluation template. So we're going to go through alphabetical order just to give everybody a chance to share initial questions and thoughts, and then we'll move into a more free-flowing discussion. I talked to Nathaniel a little while ago, and because he's SHU, he's always either first or last. So we thought we would mix things up this time and go in alphabetical order by first name. And of course, I forgot to make the list of that. So I think Andrew is actually first. So since we already heard him sort of introduce this, Amy, would you be willing to be the first person to speak?
And I would, because also last time I checked, M came before N.
Agreed.
Oh, yeah.
Agreed.
That's great. Now, this is what happens when I'm trying to type out the list. Yes, M does come before N. Correct. Amy is first. I apologize.
What would back to school be without talking about our ABCs? Actually, I don't really have much to say. I support the approach. I think it's a good way to go to lean on the OSBA leadership standards. We're not going to forego our student achievement focus and our orientation on metrics, but as far as the evaluation template, I support what we've arrived at.
All right, that was the perfect amount of time because it allowed me to type out the alphabetical order for the rest of the time. Andrew, did you want to add any personal thoughts to the statement you already made?
No, I think you heard enough from me.
And we never know when your phone's going to cut out. I'm next, and then read the rest of the list so you're all prepared. So it's Amy, Andrew, Ailey, Julia, Michelle, Nathaniel, Rita, Scott. I think I got it all right. M before N. So I think, I really think our board goals are vitally important. And I think we as a board are doing a lot of work to focus on student outcomes as the essentials of what we're about. And I know we have made a commitment to especially focus and name outcomes for our Black and Native students, and that is a huge priority and deeply important, and that we have no way this year to know where we are or what we can expect because of the pandemic. And so I think we really need to look at how do we evaluate this school year, knowing that data is going to be radically different than the trajectory we were on of closing the achievement gap and improving third grade reading, fifth grade math, secondary readiness, and post-secondary readiness. And I know that we as a district are committed to all those things. And yet we still need to evaluate the superintendent on very concrete and clear standards. And I just don't feel like we'll have concrete and clear standards when it comes to those four board goals for this year. So I really think those OSBA leadership standards capture the pieces of, a high performing superintendent. And I think, as we saw last year on those standards, it gave us a lot to engage with Superintendent Guerrero around places where he was excelling and places where he and his leadership team could do some more work and have some more potential growth. So I really found them helpful last year, the 5 we did, and really see them as, in this crazy year, a great stopgap measure as we kind of figure out where the ground is in our work together. Julia, what are your thoughts?
Well, since this is a first public discussion we've had of it, I had some questions. So one, and I can pose it and we can come back to it. but was for Director Scott, that he said that we would have data, but that we wouldn't, because it would be based on obviously a different set of circumstances, that we wouldn't be using it to measure. And I would like to hear at some point tonight from Dr. Brown on what data we will have. Just from I'm not a big fan of the OSBA evaluation tool. We spent a lot of time over a year and a half talking with the Council of Great City Schools consultant, AJ Crahill, about using student-focused outcomes. And then just even last month, and we settled on the evaluation template. And then last month as a board, we kind of reaffirmed our own usage of it for our own evaluation. And so I'm interested in knowing, when I look at the OSBA standards, to me, they seem more adult focused and activity focused versus in terms of what is considered accomplished, versus it's such a far, I think, stretch from the student goal. So I'd be interested in hearing both from Dr. Brown, but also I think we should ask the Council of Great City Schools consultant, AJ, about what other districts are doing, because we're not the only ones who adopted student-focused metrics. We're not the only ones around the country that obviously are facing a very different environment. I do think parents still expect us to be sort of measuring both ourselves and the whole leadership of the district through how students are progressing, and recognizing that we're in very unusual times, like what that might look like. And I don't see it in the current standards. So those are the questions I have in my mind, and as I approach thinking about the evaluation.
Thank you, Director Brim-Edwards. I think we'll have Dr. Brown. Are you a doctor, Russ? I think super smart man. PhD, probably like 8 PhDs. I don't know. We'll have Dr. Brown respond to that, and Director Scott after we've had a chance for everyone to sort of share their initial thoughts. I also just was reminded that unfortunately our student rep doesn't weigh in on the superintendent's evaluation. It's one of those weird quirks of all of the legal parts of how we do this. And so we're going in a different order today, and we'll practice this again, and we'll have Nathaniel weigh in another time on another topic. So after Julia comes Michelle. So Michelle, what thoughts do you have, Director DePlace?
Yes, hi. So I'm happy that we're using, I'm having a hard time articulating tonight. The OSBA's standards in lieu of a better tool, evaluation tool. I think that we have to be adaptive in this time. It's just such a strange year. I'm happy that we're starting earlier than we did last year. And my only concern is really if we find halfway through the year that we're seeing enormous decreases in achievement, I'm wondering if we have a plan for course correcting mid-year based on the data that we're seeing from Dr. Brown.
And we'll have Superintendent Guerrero and maybe Dr. Brown respond to that at the end of our time, but that's a great question, Dr. DePlace. Okay, so we're skipping Nathaniel, sorry, and then we'll move on to Rita.
Can you hear me? Can you hear? Okay. And I can't guarantee that if I talk for more than 30 seconds, I can't guarantee my internet will hold. But anyway, so let me start with a general. I think this evaluation template is much improved. I think it shows. Well, I'm gonna make a guess that COSA contributed mightily to a number of these changes, and I think I think a lot of them are really good, and in particular the the clear emphasis on equity throughout this template that was largely absent previously. So that I think that's great. I guess I would make one suggestion. I'm looking at the workbook that is attached to this, of which this evaluation template is a piece, but there are other pieces as well. And I think a number of the pieces are worth looking at for, well, I don't know, adoption as well, or at least I think they're useful to make the evaluation process more comprehensive and more objective. And in particular, I would point out there are a number of appendices, and Appendix C, it provides what they're calling, if I can pull it up here, it provides guidelines for how the superintendent can write his self-evaluation. That's part of the evaluation process. And it provides a kind of suggestion for artifacts of evidence that can be used in the superintendent's self-evaluation. And I think a lot of those are really good, and may well make it easier for the superintendent to write his self-evaluation, which over the last 3 years has tended to be pretty substantive and pretty long. And I think this might make it a little more manageable for the superintendent. And I guess that's all I would say. We are not abandoning the goals. We are having to recalibrate the baseline. And I look forward to Dr. Brown's explanation of how other districts are approaching it and what we can expect when we get some actual numbers. So that's it. Thank you.
And miraculously, your internet held out for all of that, Director Moore. All right, Director Bailey. Scott, I think you need to unmute.
Are correct. Want to echo previous comments made. Let's keep track of the metrics, but it's really not proper to use them in any kind of evaluation at this point. I want to second Director DePass's comment about as we keep track of the metrics, and especially around how our students of color are doing, we know there's going to be students, regardless of their background, who may not do well in a virtual environment. And what kind of interventions will we have when we see that happening over the next couple of months? I think it's going to be one of the key things for us to watch this year. Finally, in terms of the 8 principles, I would like to see more emphasis put on operations, buildings, sustainability in particular. That's the one kind of, I don't know if it's an addition or there is one piece on, I think on operations. But I'd like to see us pay a little more attention to that in terms of our evaluation.
Could you, there was a motorcycle and funky internet, so I didn't quite catch all of that. So I heard you say building sustainability, and my brain goes to like 80 places. Is that like a climate justice thing where we're looking at sustainability of physical places? Is that building sustainability of the district growth? Like, could you elaborate on what you're looking for specifically with that?
Yes, the sustainability in particular, although I think sustainability of growth in general is a good idea, in particular around energy efficiency, and in terms of buildings, in particular around better integrating the education side of the house with the building design side of things. That's been an issue since the first bond, and I think it's time we stepped up and addressed that.
That makes sense. I'm glad I asked because I was not quite tracking with you. So we had a couple of questions raised. So let's hear from Dr. Brown for a little bit, and then we can circle back into a more open conversation about these pieces. Dr. Brown, could you give us sort of an overview of how data will be gathered, what that will look like for this year, and kind of some of your thoughts on our board goals?
But before I do that, I'd like to allow the superintendent an opportunity to speak if he so desires, or if he wants me to pick up and run, I can, but I'd like to at least afford him the opportunity.
I appreciate your sense of deference there, Dr. Brown. You really are the expert in this field. I think what we're hearing in the conversation here, and I know staff is making notes, is we certainly, this is an important exercise for the board to engage in annually. It's important for anybody to be clear about the expectations for one's performance and what you might consider, doing that adequately or satisfactorily or at an excellent level. I think it's true. It is an atypical year because as much as we love performance management, that's a little tough to do when you actually don't have students in front of you to collect data. Of course, we're going to be interested in implementing whatever we can, even if it's virtual or over distance, so that we know how to best identify and support our students, which is our primary concern at this time. Understanding that it won't surprise anybody that our students, given the more limited instructional time, likely aren't at the level that we would hope. And so how we accelerate learning for all of our students, especially those who are being disproportionately impacted, I know are going to be the basis for most of our conversations at the school level and at the district level. But I'll have Dr. Brown expand a little bit more on what some of our internal conversations have been on this topic already.
So I'd like to start with Director DePass's question about mid-year correction. I think one of the things that the pandemic has required of us is to collect and respond to data fairly quickly and to make adjustments fairly rapidly based on that data. And we're certainly in one of those cycles right now as we look forward throughout this year and try to anticipate, having students back in buildings and what do we need to do to be able to move towards that target over time. In a normal academic year, the purpose of a mid-year assessment, a very reliable benchmark assessment mid-year, is exactly for the point that Director DePass brought up, which is to give an opportunity for our buildings and central office to do a mid-year correction and to adjust. We will certainly be doing that, but I think we're going to be making adjustments throughout the fall as we gather information and as we look to the implementation both of the comprehensive distance learning and as we begin to look at expanding opportunities for students to be in buildings this fall. So that's an absolutely critical part of moving forward. Looking back, Director Brim Edwards, in terms of what data will we have, that depends a little bit. So we're going to offer a map assessment window this fall. It's going to be done remotely. we're going to be asking children to do that in their homes. At this point, I don't know, what the participation rate for that will be. I think a lot of parents are going to be very interested in that data. They're going to want to know where their students are starting this academic year. There's a lot of evidence across the country. I've seen a couple of studies done that say that parents are very, very interested in where their students are starting. As the superintendent pointed out, there is concern about learning loss. Certainly the spring was less than ideal across this country. None of us wish to be in the circumstances where we're doing distance learning. So I anticipate having map data for at least 2 points this year. There is some question about what the state assessment will look like in the spring, and whether or not there will be an SAT window in the spring, and what that will look like. So there are things that will be contingent on whether or not we can have students in buildings in order to be able to do them, or whether or not the vendors create a pathway forward that we can use that data. So what we do have control over at this point in time, again, is the MAP assessment windows. We do want to have those because they will give us a reliable start point for the year and give us some sense of growth during the course of the year. I also expect us to be gathering some data tied to student perceptions as well. We will be using the Successful School Survey yet again this year, and we're going to use it with a more comprehensive representation of our student population going from grade 3 through grade 11. So I think we'll have some additional data there as well. But I think, as several of the directors have pointed out, the challenge this year isn't necessarily whether or not we have data, but what will the data mean, and what will it mean with respect to what it has in the past? Because the circumstances under which we're providing education right now are vastly different than what they were in the past. And I don't think many of us would think that they're equivalent. And so even when we look at an assessment like MAP, which gives us growth information over time, that growth is based on what normally happens in a brick and mortar setting, not in remote education. So a little different to try to make inferences about how much growth would be enough in this course of this year, because frankly, no one has that normative data at this point in time. And to base accountability decisions on data that we don't really have a norm or a baseline for doesn't seem appropriate to me. That being said, I think the board last year came to a really nice evaluation tool, a balanced evaluation tool, one that put more weight on student metrics, but also acknowledged that there are these characteristics of leadership that really matter, and that act as a complement to that student performance information. And we are committed to making that data public this year and working towards being able to set goals that are anchored to this new baseline as we move forward.
Director Grimm-Edwards, did that answer your question, or do you have further thought?
Yeah, so I'm curious, what about the high school data? We'll be able to collect that. That's not MAP related.
Will we be able to collect high school data? Yes. Frankly, I was mainly weighing into assessment data at this point. I am concerned with some of the high school data that is contingent upon assessment that it may not be available. So that's why I mentioned SAT. But that's also applicable, though, to the language assessments that are used for the seal of biliteracy. So I'm a little concerned about the availability for those as well this year.
What are other districts doing that you know of to keep the focus on student focus versus adult activity in terms of if it's not test data, are there other indicators of academic progress? And I'm just asking these questions because this is the big question that I get asked by parents, or concern that gets expressed, of just a sense of like how we know where our kids are and whether what we're doing is working and they're actually advancing.
So again, I think that the framework that the board put in place last year was unique and balanced in its nature. And unfortunately, the data that was used for that doesn't mean the same thing this year. That's the challenge. I am not aware of too many folks who are working to use assessment data as part of an accountability framework right now, because again, there's a challenge in the inference about meaning. A lot of systems, frankly, use rubrics like the one that the state provides. It's based on standards, it's based on competencies tied to superintendent, and it's meant to cover a range of functions of an organization of our size and how the superintendent manages those. That's a fairly common approach. Realistically, when I talk with my colleagues across the country, they're just busy trying to get things up and running, trying to make sure that we're serving kids and solving the logistical problems necessary to be able to make sure that students are fed, that they have devices, that the curriculum has been updated. So frankly, a lot of those are inputs, but they're incredibly important inputs in an environment like we're in right now, where we're essentially turning education on a dime to go from face-to-face to a comprehensive distance learning model. And it's just, that is where the lion's share of the work and what I would consider meaningful work right now aimed at basic services towards kids.
Great. We have about 10 minutes left of our time for this discussion. Director DePass, I wanted to make sure you felt like you got your question answered that you had asked about how to change course and the monitoring of that. I know Dr. Brown spoke to that, but did you feel like it was answered?
Yeah, I did for the most part. I know that we're just in such extraordinary times. If I have questions, I'll follow up with you directly. Thank you for asking.
Thanks, Michelle. Are there other comments? I know Director Comstam, you had raised a question about should we do all 8? Is that still your thinking, or are there other thoughts? No, you're good. Anyone else? Sorry, go ahead, Amy. Anyone else have any other additional comments or questions about the proposed evaluation, the OSBA leadership guidelines?
Can I just echo what Dr. Brown just said about all of the, the inputs being critically important. I just want to highlight that schools for a very long time have been expected to take on the burden of dealing with students, the well-being needs of students and families. And I think that one of the things that this pandemic has revealed unmistakably is that the social safety net has been shredded over the years, and that once again, school districts are being asked to pick up the ball, to mix metaphors, and that all of the things that Portland Public Schools and other school districts are being asked to provide for students are critically important, and I don't think any of us would want to do otherwise. But people need to realize what school districts are taking on that go well beyond the core, the alleged core mission of educating students. We are, not to put too fine a point on it, I think in many cases, we are keeping families alive, or at least helping to, by providing food for families that are otherwise up against the wall economically. So I think everybody is going to have to be forgiving about some of the things that the district will not be able to do, or will not be able to document. And personally, if it comes down to a choice between child well-being and test scores, I'll take the well-being every day. So that's it. Thanks.
All right, any other thoughts from any other board members? I know we haven't heard from Director Bailey on this again, or Dr. Scott.
I'll jump in. Just no, I really appreciate this. Is a great conversation, and I really appreciate the thoughts of a lot of my fellow board members. I mean, I think getting back to Dr. Brown's comment about getting the district up and running is vitally important, and those are inputs, right? And when we talk about performance measurement, we often there's this tendency to sort of ignore the inputs, but this is one of those moments where I think the inputs are really important, and so one of the things about getting back to Director Brim-Edwards' comments, I completely agree. We don't want to lose focus on the student outcomes, and I think OSBA standards, they're good, and I think OSBA spent a lot of time developing them. They are a little bit more adult-centric, and we've been trying to, as a district, move beyond that towards these student-centered outcomes, which is really important. And I want to stress that we're not losing that, right? We're going to come back to that in 21-22. And I think the OSBA standards actually allow us to focus a little bit on some of those really important things about how well are we as a district getting things up and running in this moment. And, I've been really impressed with a lot of the work, but I think it's good for us as a board to keep our focus during this whole year on how is the superintendent and his staff, how are they responding to this moment, and are they rising to it? And so I think we get some of that through the OSBA standards, and then we get to come back to the student outcome focused standards in the 2021-22 school year. So anyway, it's a really good conversation, and I really appreciate the thoughts that people have had.
Sorry, I was making notes and I realized I was not muted, so I apologize if you heard a bunch of clicking there. Zoom. Yeah, I think I've seen lots of places that the quote for 2020 is, "You're still on mute," which is probably something I either say every day or have said to me. So thank you for those thoughts, Director Scott. Anything else before we end this discussion? Remember that I've been taking some notes, Kara's been taking the minutes, Director Scott has been listening. And we'll go ahead and take those thoughts, make any amendments as needed, and then come back to you with an evaluation proposal for a vote on September 22nd. And that proposal will be given to you in your package the Thursday before. Director Moore, did you have an additional comment?
I just wanted to clarify the date. So did you just say September 22nd? Okay. I misheard it the first time, so.
Good. I was like, I'm like in a brain fog because of, the whole Monday is a holiday thing. I think it's Sunday today and I should be at church instead of at a school board meeting. So I'm just very confused and keep feeling like I'm making little mistakes like that. So yeah, September 22nd is what I think the next board meeting is, but maybe not.
So one thought I had is how, when we come back to look at these, how we are more explicit within the framework about sort of the concept of targeted universalism. And I know in our board goals, we were really explicit about talking about Black and Indigenous and students of color. And OSBA is, well, they've changed it somewhat, and there is in the standard, standard number 2, ethics and professional norms, some discussion about that, but it seems like if there's a way that we can continue to use that lens, whether it's for inputs or a different sort of building out the framework, that we be explicit about the students that we are focused on. And I'd have to give it more thought to think about how that might work, but that's one thing that strikes me between where we were, if you take away the outcomes and the measurements, but like just how we framed it up, it really was a focus on a specific set of students, knowing that if we did well with those students, that we did well, we're going to do well for all students. And I'd be happy to come up with some thoughts about how we might do that using the OSBA framework.
I would suggest, I mean, I don't think standard 2 is fully responsive to your concerns. I think you want to look at leadership standard number 4, culturally responsive instructional leadership and improvement.
Yeah, I was in a couple different places. It just seemed like they kind of talk about it generally, and we were super specific with a very defined point of view. So I'm wondering if there can be some carryover from our focus on a set of students that PPS has not, served well over the years. Then that's to bring that sort of focus or lens into this document more. But yeah, I think you're right, Director Moore, that there's a number of places where you could do that.
All right, well,
I wanted to offer, I would be willing to work on that. I noticed that too. I couldn't, I don't have it printed out in front of me, whether it was leadership standard 3 or 4. I thought that the language could be strengthened. And since we're using all 8 of those standards, perhaps we could present something at our next reading.
So our next meeting is when we're gonna go ahead and vote. So Michelle, I'll ask you to connect with Director Scott about crafting some language and having that ready for our packet next Thursday. Director Bailey, did you have something else to add?
Yeah, just I was going to bring up that same point as Director DePass, that particular standard, great title, but it didn't seem to carry through to the specific points below it. So yeah, totally agree, Michelle.
Yeah, and I think that's a very strong point going off of what Director Brim-Edwards said around our focus and our intentionality about naming Black and Native students as a priority. I think if we can strengthen that language in our in those OSBA standards, that would make sense for the direction that we want to go as a board. So Director DePass, if you're willing to work with Andrew on some of that would be ideal.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, is there anything else that needs to be said about this evaluation conversation before we move on to committee reports? Seeing and hearing none, I'm going to ask Director Moore to share anything she has from the policy committee.
We haven't met I don't think we've met as a committee since the last meeting. And our next meeting is scheduled, and this is where I usually turn to Roseanne.
It's Monday, September 14th.
Thank you.
Well, my script says we'll have a policy report. So that was your policy report, that the next meeting is the 14th. So that's perfect. Are there any other committee reports or conference reports that we need to share?
Yes. And Director DePass, I would ask you to jump in since we co-chaired a audit and school improvement bond committee meeting in the last week, in which we received had the audit presented of the 2017 bond program, and it was the performance audit for fiscal year 2019. Because it was a combined committee, we had a majority of the board members there. We also had, I think, 4 or 5 students participating, and they had excellent questions as part of the meeting. And I really appreciate that we've, Nathaniel, your work with the district council to have students on committees, because they asked some very insightful, pointed questions that were great. But we had the audit presented. Basically, we have an independent external performance auditor SEC that did the audit. They use the basically generally accepted government auditing standards. And one of the they focused on several areas, but health and safety, construction management, contracts and procurement, and then prior audit recommendations. And all the documents from that meeting are posted on the district website, also on the sort of audit committee page. But if I were to summarize, and again, I'd ask Director DePass, who's the chair of the School Bond Improvement Committee. But in general, they found that the district is making good progress on the health and safety improvements that were a key part of the 2017 bond, and provided some school by school information. They had some recommendations and findings that I don't think were that are material to the progress on the bond, but ones that would even elevate the work even more. And essentially, they also found that the district staff has been implementing the recommendations that came out of the audits from the 2012 bond and the 2017 bond, and in most cases are substantially complete or on their way to completing them. Director DePass, what did I miss?
I'm searching for my notes and not finding them, and I have a massive migraine right now. So I appreciate you taking the lead on that. And yeah, I can't find I'm thinking I might not have saved my OneNote from that meeting.
I think the universal board sign of migraine is to put on your sunglasses, Director DePass, during the meeting.
They're not handy right now, but yeah, that's a great reminder.
I'm so sorry. I've had those during meetings before, and it's just the worst. Thank you for sticking with us tonight. Was there anything else you had to add, Director DePass?
No.
I would just say, really the Office of the School Modernization, the Business and Operations team, Dan Young's team, have really done a good job at reviewing the findings and implementing any recommendations. Again, no major deviations from what was promised in the bonds. And I would say to taxpayers and community members that there's a high level of scrutiny of all the bond fund expenditures. A good job to the OSM and extended team.
All right, any other committee or conference reports that we need to make? All right, well, do we have any other business that we need to address before we adjourn? All right, I believe that this is then my second meeting that we're ending ahead of time. Not that I'm keeping track or keeping score or anything, but we're 3 minutes ahead of schedule. So be careful out there, everybody. Make sure you have an evacuation bag packed. If you're in a green area that's a #1 evacuation level, be safe. I hear that Clackamas County is a little rough tonight, and I know that we've got students and folks, staff, and others who live in Clackamas County, so be safe. Director Bailey, did you have something to add?
Last note, remember in November, we will be voting on our bond renewal program. So I just want to remind folks that this bond will go a long ways towards keeping our existing buildings safe, warm, and dry. It will also allow us to complete Benson, or actually rebuild Benson. It will fund the planning all the way up to construction for Wilson and Cleveland, and will include, for the first time, important curriculum improvements, including funding ethnic studies development, curriculum development. And finally, we'll have, I think, a historically unprecedented investment in the Jefferson cluster. to rebuild Jefferson High School and improve buildings there. Yet to be determined by a community engagement process.
Can I just add to that? Thank you, Director Bailey. I also noticed that now that we're on the other side of Labor Day, things are in full swing with the bond campaign, and there'll be announcements up this next week. But over the last week, the bond has gathered the support of lots of community groups from Albina Vision Trust, Latino Network, the Oregon Food Bank, Stand for Children, and about 24 community and regional elected leaders. So we'll be announcing those and also other developments with the campaign separately. And we also have, there's a website up and additional information on all the components of the bond that Director Bailey mentioned as well on that website. And I wish I had it on hand right now. I think is it yes for PDX? Director Bailey, can you help me? Is it yes for PDX.schools?
Isn't it yes for Portland Public Schools?
The website is yespdxschools.com.
Okay.
And it's formally measure 26-215.
And you can also, okay, great. All right, well, I counted my chickens before they were hatched. It's now 7:25.
One detail also in the bond is planning for a potential future expansion of Roosevelt High School.
Yes, it's important to remember all the amazing things this bond is going to do for our students and our communities as well. So our next meeting will be September 22nd, and we'll be voting on the superintendent's evaluation as well as lots of other fun items. And hope to see you all back here again. This meeting is adjourned.